What makes a place livable? Is it safety, comfort, clean water, a paved road, the quiet promise that tomorrow will look a little like today? Or is it something harder to measure, something that survives beyond convenience? Across the world, there are communities that seem to exist in defiance of ordinary logic. Villages balanced over water, hidden in forests, clinging to cliffs, breathing air that feels borrowed from danger itself. To an outsider, these places can seem less like homes than tests of endurance. And yet, for the people who live there, they are not symbols of hardship alone. They are inheritances. Every landscape teaches its own kind of truth. A mountain teaches humility. A desert teaches patience. The sea teaches surrender. Over generations, human beings have learned to shape their lives around places that do not easily welcome them. They have built routines where others see only risk. They have raised children where strangers imagine only fear. In doing so, they reveal something unsettling and beautiful at once. Survival is never only about shelter. It is also about memory, belonging, and the quiet force of attachment. This journey begins there in that tension between danger and devotion, not with abandoned ruins or romantic myths, but with living communities, real people, real mornings, fires being lit before dawn, footsteps on wet planks, voices rising through mist. The simple daily decision to remain. Some of these places were chosen out of freedom. Others were shaped by exile, necessity, or long-forgotten threats. Over time, the reason almost stops mattering. What remains is the bond between a people and a landscape that has marked them. We often imagine home as the place that protects us. But what if home is also the place that asks the most of us? What if the harshest edges of the world are where the human spirit becomes easiest to see? What does freedom look like when it leaves almost no trace behind? In the pale morning light near Lake Eyasi in northern Tanzania, the answer begins with footsteps in dust. A few figures move through the thorny savanna with bows in hand, scanning the ground for prints, listening for birds, reading the wind the way others read a clock. There are no fences here, no streets, no permanent walls to separate one life from another. Only the open land, the long memory of the body, and a way of living so old it feels almost outside of history. The Hadzab have often been described as one of the last communities on Earth still living primarily by hunting and gathering. But labels can flatten what is human. What matters more is the rhythm of the day. Food is found, not stored. Shelter is built quickly from branches and grass, then left behind without grief when the camp moves on. Honey, berries, tubers, wild game, these are not relics of a forgotten age, but parts of a living relationship with the land. Knowledge passes by gesture, by example, by repetition under the sun. To many outsiders, such a life can seem precarious, even fragile. We are taught to equate permanence with progress. We trust concrete, ownership, accumulation. Yet there is another kind of security in knowing exactly how to survive with little, in needing less from the world because you already belong to it. The Hadizabé are not untouched by modernity. Roads, governments, and markets exist nearby, close enough to be reached. The distance is not geographical. It is philosophical. Their story unsettles a common assumption that history moves in only one direction, toward more structure, more possession, more control. But what if some people have seen that road and simply chosen not to walk it? In the stillness of the savannah, that choice lingers like heat after sunset. And it leaves behind a difficult question. When we speak of advancement, what exactly are we hoping to keep, and what have we already forgotten? Why would a community choose to resemble ghosts? In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, morning does not always arrive clearly. It gathers first as vapor, sliding through the valleys, softening trees and riverbanks until the landscape seems half imagined. Out of that whiteness, a figure appears, then another. Their skin is coated in pale clay. Their faces are hidden behind large masks with hollow eyes and twisted mouths. They do not rush. They move slowly, almost unnaturally, as if they belong more to the mist than to the ground beneath it. This is the world of the Asaro mudmen, where fear once became a language of survival. According to local tradition, the story began in defeat. Warriors driven toward the riverbank hid in mud through the night, waiting in silence while their enemies searched the darkness. When dawn came and they rose from the water caked in ghostly clay, the sight was so strange, so deeply wrong to the human eye, that those pursuing them fled. Whether the story is remembered exactly as it happened matters less than what it reveals. Imagination can protect as surely as strength. Sometimes the most powerful defense is the ability to step outside the shape others expect of you. Today, the masks remain. They are exaggerated, theatrical, almost dreamlike in their distortion. Yet beneath the spectacle is an older human impulse to turn terror into ritual and ritual into identity. What may once have been an act of emergency became a tradition passed from hand to hand, face to face, generation to generation. The body becomes a canvas. The village becomes a stage where memory is not spoken so much as worn. There is something profound in that transformation. Fear usually narrows the world. It reduces people to instinct, to escape, to silence. But here, fear was reshaped into art. It was made visible, controlled, even ceremonial. And perhaps that is what culture often is at its core. The long work of taking what once threatened to destroy us and giving it form we can live with. In the end, the mud does not hide who they are. It tells the story of how they endured. How much cold can a culture carry before it begins to disappear? In the far north of Mongolia, where the forest thickens into taiga and winter seems to arrive with a kind of permanence, small groups of reindeer move between the trees like pale smoke. Close behind them come the satan, bundled against the cold, guiding the animals across frozen ground and narrow mountain paths. Their homes are light enough to be dismantled and carried. Their camps leave only temporary marks in the snow. By the time one season settles in, they are already preparing to move again. Life here is shaped not by roads or boundaries, but by migration. The reindeer decide the rhythm. Families follow, crossing terrain that would defeat most machines, living in conical tents warmed by fire and closeness. At these elevations, the air itself feels sharpened. Winter temperatures drop so low that exposed skin can burn from cold in minutes. There is little infrastructure, and often no easy way to reach the nearest town. Yet isolation for the Satan is not merely a condition to endure. It is part of a world in which movement, animal life, and human identity are woven tightly together. The reindeer are not just a source of transport or milk. They are companions, wealth, memory, and continuity. A child learns their moods before learning any map. A family's future can be read in the health of the herd. When the herds shrink, something more than an economy is threatened. A language of living begins to fade. Modern schooling, medical access, and state systems all offer forms of security, but they also pull at the bonds that hold this older pattern in place. To leave the forest is not simply to change address. It is to step into a different understanding of time itself. And so the Satan remain, even as the pressures around them grow. They endure the cold, the distance, and the uncertainty, because the taiga is not an obstacle standing between them and life. It is the setting that gives life its meaning. In a world that prizes permanence, they remind us that some identities survive precisely because they keep moving. What does it mean to say someone is gone? In the highlands of South Sulawesi, the answer is neither simple nor immediate. Morning light touches the carved roofs of Torajan houses, and inside some homes the dead remain close, resting in a room nearby, dressed with care, spoken to in gentle voices, included in the daily grammar of family life. Death here is not always treated as a sudden break. It can unfold slowly, as though love itself needs time to understand what has happened. In Tana Toraja, the person who has died may still be addressed as if ill, still part of the household, still moving through memory with such presence that absence has not yet taken full shape. Meals are set nearby. Conversations continue. The family waits, sometimes for months or longer, until the funeral can be held with the dignity tradition requires. To outsiders, this can seem startling, even unsettling. But beneath that first reaction lies a profound tenderness. Grief is not rushed. It is given room to breathe. When the ceremony finally comes, it gathers not only sorrow, but community, obligation, ancestry, and status. It is an event measured in days, in sacrifice, in songs and arrivals, in the long effort of honoring a life properly before letting it cross into another realm. Later, coffins may be placed in cliffs high above the valley, accompanied by carved figures that keep watch in stillness. In some rituals, the dead are brought out again, cleaned, redressed, and reintroduced to the world of the living, not as spectacle, but as continuation. There is something deeply human in this refusal to make death invisible. Many societies hide it behind hospital curtains, sealed doors, and polite silence. Tana Toraja does the opposite. It keeps death near enough to be felt, named, and woven into ordinary love. In that nearness is a difficult wisdom. We do not lose people all at once. We lose them in layers over time, through memory and ritual and the slow education of the heart. Perhaps that is why the Torajan way feels so haunting. It asks whether grief is not only pain, but also a form of loyalty. What happens when the sea is no longer a boundary, but a birthplace? Across the waters of Southeast Asia, where the horizon often blurs into light, there are communities for whom land has never been the center of life. The Bajau have long lived above the tide in houses balanced on wooden stilts, connected by narrow walkways that creak above open water. Beneath them, the sea is not scenery, it is pantry, pathway, workplace, memory. Children enter it almost as soon as they can stand. By the time they are grown, many move through the water with a confidence that seems to belong to another species. To watch a Bajau diver disappear below the surface is to see the body enter an older conversation with nature. No tanks, no glass walls, just breath held, muscles quiet, eyes open to a world of shifting blue and silver. They descend toward reefs and seagrass, toward fish and shellfish, toward the hidden economy of the ocean floor. For generations, this knowledge was treated by outsiders as skill alone, an extreme practice refined through discipline and necessity. But science has begun to suggest something more complicated, that centuries of life at sea may have shaped the Bajau body itself, turning survival into biology. And yet adaptation is never only physical. To live on water is to accept instability as ordinary. Floors sway, weather decides the rhythm of the day. Storms can rearrange a future overnight. The sea feeds, but it also takes. Hearing may be damaged, risk is constant, comfort is spare. Still, whole families remain, building lives over waves with no claim to the solid ground most of us take for granted. Their villages rise and weather and age with the tide, each plank a reminder that permanence can be built from movement. The Bajau story complicates our idea of what it means to belong somewhere. We often imagine home as rooted, fixed, anchored in soil, but some homes float. Some are carried in muscle memory, in breath control, in a child learning the language of currents before the language of maps. Perhaps belonging does not always mean standing still. Sometimes it means learning so completely how to move with what the world gives you. How can a city rise where the ground itself has been replaced by water and waste? On the edge of Lagos, where glass towers catch the sun and traffic hums with the force of a modern megacity, another world begins just beyond the shoreline. In Makoko, homes stand on stilts driven deep into a dark lagoon. Narrow canoes slip between them like bicycles on neighborhood streets. Children paddle to school. Vendors drift past with goods balanced in wooden boats. Daily life does not unfold on pavement, but on water that carries both livelihood and danger in equal measure. From a distance, Makoko can appear improvised, as if it were built overnight from urgency alone. And in some ways it was. Families came because the city had no room for them on land or no affordable place within reach of work and survival. Over time, necessity became architecture. New stilts were planted. New rooms were added. A floating settlement took shape through repetition, resilience, and the refusal to disappear. What outsiders might call informal, the residents know as ordinary life. Cooking, repairing nets, raising children, attending school, mourning losses, starting over after storms. But the beauty of endurance here cannot be separated from the harshness of its setting. The lagoon is polluted, sanitation is scarce. Illness moves easily where clean water does not. When the rains come hard, the boundary between house and flood begins to thin. Governments have threatened demolition, sometimes carrying it out in pieces, as though erasing a community were easier than serving it. Yet Makoko continues, growing outward one platform at a time, held together not by policy but by human insistence. There is something revealing in that contrast, A global city often measures value in concrete, investment, and official plans. Makoko measures it in access to one more day, one more meal, one more chance for a child to cross the water and return home safely. It is a place built in the shadow of exclusion, yet filled with evidence of invention. And it leaves behind a difficult question. When a city refuses to make room for its most vulnerable people, who is truly living on unstable ground? What if the water beneath your home was once the only thing standing between your family and capture? On Lake Nokoué in Benin, dawn arrives in ripples. Canoes glide through narrow channels between houses raised on stilts, past floating vendors, school children balancing themselves with easy precision, and wooden platforms that have served as kitchens, porches, and gathering places for generations. There are no streets here in the ordinary sense, no sidewalks, no reassuring strip of earth beneath the village. The water is the road, the marketplace, the silence beneath every conversation. Ganvie did not begin as an experiment in unusual architecture. It began as an act of escape. Centuries ago, when slave raids tore through the region, the people who had found this village turned to the lake for protection. Their enemies, bound by spiritual prohibitions, would not pursue them onto the water. So families built outward over the surface, creating a settlement in a place others feared to enter. What first emerged from terror slowly became tradition. A refuge became a hometown. Survival hardened into identity. That history still lingers in the structure of daily life. Fishing remains central. Boats function as both vehicles and storefronts. Children learn balance early, reading currents as naturally as others read traffic. Every beam and stilt carries the memory of adaptation, though nothing here is easy. Wood decays, water erodes. The village must constantly repair itself against time. To live in Ganvie is to accept maintenance as a way of life, to understand that safety is not a permanent achievement, but an ongoing labor shared across generations. There is a quiet lesson in that. We often imagine history as something behind us, sealed in books or monuments. But in places like Ganvie, history remains structural. It is under the floorboards, in the route to school, in the shape of the village itself. The original danger may have passed, yet the form created by that danger endures. And perhaps that is the deeper truth. Human beings do not merely survive the pressures of history. Sometimes they continue living inside the shapes those pressures leave behind. How far from the ground must a person climb before fear becomes ordinary? Deep in the rainforest of Papua, where humidity hangs in the air like breath, and the forest floor disappears beneath roots, shadow, and flood. The Korowai answer that question by building upward. High above the earth, balanced among trunks and branches, their homes rise into the canopy like extensions of the trees themselves. From below, they can seem almost impossible, fragile structures suspended over a world of insects, mud, and darkness, reached by narrow notched poles that demand as much nerve as balance. For the Korowai, height is not a gesture of spectacle. It is a practical wisdom shaped by environment. The rainforest can flood. Mosquitoes and disease gather near the ground. Visibility is limited and security is never guaranteed. To live above the forest floor is to gain distance from some of its threats. It is also to accept new ones. Every trip up or down carries risk. Children learn early what would terrify most adults. Hands grip wood polished by repetition. Bodies memorize the angle of ascent. Courage becomes less an emotion than a habit practiced several times a day. For much of their history, the Korowai lived with little knowledge of the wider world beyond the forest. Their houses, tools, and movement patterns emerged from close attention to a specific place, not from outside design. Entire communities may relocate when local resources thin out, leaving behind homes that took weeks to build and beginning again elsewhere. That willingness to move, to rebuild, to trust knowledge over permanence, speaks to a relationship with land that is intimate rather than possessive. Nothing is held forever. Everything is made in conversation with what the forest allows. There is something humbling in that perspective. Modern life often teaches us to conquer environments, to flatten them, to install certainty where uncertainty once lived. The Korowai do something different. They negotiate, they adapt, they rise just high enough to survive, yet remain bound to the living architecture around them. And in that balance between vulnerability and ingenuity, they ask a larger question. Is civilization always about mastering nature? Or can it also be about learning exactly how not to fall? What could persuade people to live on a piece of rock barely larger than city block? In the middle of Lake Victoria, where the horizon opens wide and empty in every direction, Migingo rises from the water with almost startling abruptness. It is less an island than an outcrop, a hard fragment of stone crowded with corrugated roofs, narrow passages, and lives pressed close together. From a distance, it looks temporary, as if a strong wind might rearrange it. Up close, it feels dense with purpose. Every inch has been claimed because there is almost no inch to spare. Space here is measured differently. Homes lean into one another. Privacy is thin. Fresh water does not flow from any natural source. It must be brought in by boat, every drop carrying a cost. There is little room for comfort, almost none for solitude. And yet the island remains busy with movement. Fishermen preparing nets, traders negotiating, generators coughing to life, voices rising over the sound of waves hitting metal and stone. Migingo exists because of what surrounds it. The waters nearby are rich with fish, and those fish have made this rock worth more than its size could ever suggest. That value has not brought peace. Borders on maps become strangely fragile when they reach open water, and Migingo has lived for years under the shadow of overlapping claims, official flags, and unresolved authority. Two nations can look at the same rock and see different truths, but the people living there wake each morning to a reality more immediate than politics. Work, weather, income, risk. On Migingo, necessity has little patience for abstraction. There is something almost allegorical about the place. A community forms on bare stone because survival gathers where resources gather, even when the conditions are cramped, uncertain, and contested. The island offers no beauty in the traditional sense, no pastoral peace, no sense of spacious belonging. What it offers is opportunity, however harshly framed. And perhaps that is its most revealing lesson. Human beings do not always settle where life is graceful. Sometimes they settle where life is possible and then build meaning in the margins. On a rock in a vast lake, that small act of meaning becomes its own kind of territory. What kind of work asks a person to descend into the mouth of the earth before sunrise? In East Java, long before daylight softens the mountains, figures begin climbing toward the rim of Kawah Ijen. Their flashlights flicker briefly against the dark, then disappear into mist and sulfur. The air grows sharper with altitude, thinner too, until the crater opens ahead like a wound in the landscape. Inside it lies a world that seems almost unreal. Yellow mineral walls, a lake of impossible color, and fumes so dense they can turn a single breath into pain. For the miners who live in nearby villages, this is not an extraordinary expedition. It is work. They descend steep paths into the crater, carrying little more than simple tools and the expectation of strain. At the bottom, sulfur hardens around volcanic vents, forming bright deposits that must be broken by hand. The baskets are filled piece by piece until they become almost unbearable. Then comes the ascent, each step uphill under crushing weight, through gas that burns the eyes and settles into the lungs. The body pays immediately, and then again over years. And still they return. Not because the danger is hidden from them, but because it is familiar. Fathers have done this work. Sons learn the path. The route is not just a trail through rock. It is part of the inheritance of the village. What is carried out of the crater is sulfur, but also income, however modest, and the fragile continuity of home. Industry here does not arrive with machines and protective distance. It arrives through muscle, repetition, and risk accepted at dawn. Yet Kawah Ijen is not only a place of labor, it is also a reminder of how beauty and danger can occupy the same frame. The crater lake glows with a calm, almost inviting color. At night, sulfur flames can burn blue against the dark, transforming toxic gas into something nearly celestial. Few landscapes reveal so clearly how human beings are drawn to survive inside contradiction. We build lives beside what can harm us. We make meaning in places that do not love us back. And perhaps that is why the crater lingers in the mind. It asks how much of human endurance is courage, and how much is simply the shape necessity takes when it becomes tradition. Why do people remain where the world expects them to leave? By now, the pattern has begun to reveal itself. A village on water, a camp in the frozen taiga, homes lifted into rainforest trees, families living beside the dead, above the sea, within reach of poison, flood, isolation, or collapse. At first, these places seem to tell separate stories. But when held together, they begin to sound like variations on the same human theme. The bond between difficulty and belonging is often stronger than comfort can explain. From the outside, relocation can look simple. A safer house, a clinic nearby, a road, a school, a predictable future. These are real gifts, and no thoughtful person would dismiss their value. But human life is not built from utility alone. A place is more than its infrastructure. It is accent, ritual, memory, burial ground, weather pattern, inherited skill. It is the path your grandparents walked before dawn. It is the water your mother crossed to trade for food. It is the animal your child learns to follow, the room where the dead are still spoken to, the silence that teaches you who you are. Remove a person from danger, and you may also remove them from the world that made their life intelligible. This is not a romantic argument for suffering. Hardship wounds, isolation limits, poverty shortens futures. But there is a difference between observing risk and understanding attachment. Many of the communities we have visited do not stay because they are unaware of alternatives. They stay because alternatives often ask for an invisible exchange. Safety in return for identity, access in return for continuity, convenience in return for a way of seeing the world that took generations to build. Not everyone is willing to make that trade. And perhaps that is the quiet challenge these places offer the rest of us. We speak often of progress as though it were self-evident, as though every road leads upward in the same direction. But progress for whom and at what cost to memory? These villages remind us that a home is never just where a person survives. It is where their history still makes sense. Once we understand that, the impossible no longer seems quite so impossible. It begins to look profoundly human. What do these distant villages ultimately reveal about us? Perhaps not that human beings are fearless, but that fear is rarely the final author of a life. Again and again, across radically different landscapes, we have seen people answer danger not with surrender, but with adaptation. They climb higher, they move with the herd, they build over water, they descend into craters. They create rituals strong enough to hold grief, traditions strong enough to carry identity, and daily routines strong enough to make even the harshest environment feel familiar. The extraordinary, over time, becomes domestic. There is a quiet dignity in that repetition. A mother preparing food in a house above a lagoon. A child learning to balance in a canoe. A miner beginning the ascent before dawn. A hunter reading tracks in dry earth. These are not grand acts in the way history books usually prefer. They are intimate acts, almost invisible outside their own communities. Yet taken together, they form a deeper history of humanity, one not written only in empires or inventions, but in the patient art of staying alive without losing oneself. And still, these places should not be reduced to symbols. They are not metaphors alone, nor lessons staged for the rest of the world. They are homes with contradictions inside them. Beauty and hardship, pride and vulnerability, belonging and burden. To admire resilience from a distance is easy. To ask what conditions make resilience necessary is harder. Some communities remain by choice. Others remain because history, inequality, geography, or exclusion have narrowed their options. The truth is rarely singular. It is layered like sediment, like memory itself. That may be the most important thing to carry forward into the final chapter. Not a conclusion built on certainty, but a more careful kind of seeing. These villages challenge the instinct to judge a life only by comfort or convenience. They ask us to consider another measure, one rooted in continuity, relationship, and meaning. And as this journey nears its end, one question remains waiting in beneath all the others. If home can survive in places this precarious, what is it exactly that human beings are really trying to protect when they refuse to leave? In the end, perhaps the most enduring mystery is not how these villages survive, but why survival alone has never been enough to explain them. We began with landscapes that seemed to resist human settlement: water without ground, forests without roads, mountains without mercy, volcanic craters that punish each breath. By every practical measure, these are places that should have been left behind. And yet they remain inhabited, not as accidents, not as museum pieces, but as living worlds where people wake, work, grieve, celebrate, and pass their knowledge forward. What binds these stories together is not danger. Danger is only the surface. Beneath it lies something older and far more powerful: the human need to belong somewhere specific, not somewhere ideal, somewhere known. A place whose risks are familiar, whose silences have names, whose routines are woven into memory so deeply that leaving would feel less like escape than erasure. For many of these communities, home is not the opposite of hardship. It is the place where hardship has been given meaning through custom, kinship, and time. This does not mean suffering should be romanticized. No poetic language can soften toxic air, polluted water, isolation, or loss. The realities are real. But so is the truth that comfort alone does not satisfy the deepest parts of human life. We need recognition, continuity, the feeling that our lives fit inside a larger story. That is what these villages offer their people, even when they demand so much in return. And maybe that is the quiet lesson waiting at the edge of every impossible place. We often imagine civilization as a movement away from uncertainty, as though progress means insulating ourselves from the raw terms of the world. But these communities suggest another possibility. To be human is not only to seek safety, it is also to create meaning where safety is incomplete, to remember who we are under difficult skies, and to keep choosing one another in places the world has nearly forgotten. So the question that remains is not simply where human beings can live. We have already answered that in astonishing ways. The deeper question is, what makes a life feel worth holding on to? And sometimes, against all logic, the answer is a place that has asked everything of you and become home anyway.